Hi everyone, welcome. As you can see, what I've got out here on the bench already are my two yellow buckets. These buckets have worms living in them. And bucket number one is the one we're going to start with. Bucket number two is right next door. These systems have now been in service for 31 days. Fed a few times. 10 days ago was the last time we checked in. And during that last check-in 10 days ago, we finally got the last of the straggler worms removed from the system that these worms were taken from. And this system right here was actually the system that we had placed the additional worms into last time, because this was the system that was thought to have the fewer number of worms living in it. And we thought that by adding the extra worms that came out of the old system, we might be able to bring the numbers into balance. I believe that based on everyone's guesstimates so far, I've just been averaging everyone's guesstimates together and then adding that averaged guesstimate with the original estimate of the population. I believe that now we're at a point where bucket number one is actually the system with the greater number of worms living in it, as opposed to being the one with the fewer number of worms living in it. Not too surprising. There had only been a difference of 99 worms thought to be different, the difference between the population of these two systems, and we do estimate that both of these systems at this point have in excess of 3,000 worms in it. Since it was only 10 days ago that we did the final addition of worms into here, and since I'm still sort of tallying up comments and estimates, I thought I might hold off on publishing any actual finalized estimated worm counts for these systems. So I don't have like a true number in front of me right now, but I do believe that the current difference does now put this system 38 worms ahead of bucket number two. And like I said, when you're talking about two systems in which it's thought to have, more than 3,000 worms living in each system, a difference of a few dozen like that is a pretty negligible amount. It does almost seem like for most purposes you could treat these two systems as pretty much having the same number of worms living in them. And I'm just curious to see if, any of the stuff that we gave these little guys 10 days ago might still be here as leftovers. This to me looks like the skin of an onion, and I guess an onion skin might be a little bit more tough than other foods for the worms to nibble on. And that kind of makes sense why we would bump into a little bit of leftover of the onion skin. I mean, there was actual onion put in here too, and there was a number of other things, peppers, and, well, just a variety of different types of veggies were added as the feeding last time. And it does seem like the majority of the stuff they got, with the exception of perhaps a couple of tougher items like the onion skin, remain. And some of the bedding that came over too with the worms is also showing up here. The bedding that was making up the baiting box that I had used to round up the last of the stragglers out of their old environment. So it does seem like after another 10 days we're due for a feeding now. As I continue to probe down into the area where we last fed, which in most cases is just down the middle, and here too it's just the same. Right down the middle is where we usually drop their foods. I'm continuing to see a good number of worms hanging out. And I'm telling you, for a 31-day-old system with only a few feedings, these little wormies are doing quite a number on their environment. I guess when I go all the way to the bottom like I just did, I do start to run into a little bit more of the material that made up these systems originally, just a bunch of shredded paper and cardboard. So it does seem like there's still an abundance of that stuff down low. It just seems like these upper layers where we've been excavating to add their feedings lately have been worked pretty thoroughly. Maybe at some point in the future we can actually take a few extra minutes to do sort of an upturn of the lower level materials to get that stuff out to the surface and make it more available to everyday worm traffic, so it too can have a chance at breaking down. But for now, I was only curious to probe down into there to see if my hunch was true, that there's probably still a good amount of bedding in here, as it should be for a 31-day-old system. You would have to think that there's still got to be a lot of material remaining in here for the worms to continue working down. So I'm now reaching into my little supply of stuff that I bought down here to feed these guys with. It's pretty much just potato peels and cucumber peels. So I thought that maybe with each handful I can try to grab a little bit of each and try to do so in such a way that I leave a fair quantity for the other system. Let's make sure each system gets a nice juicy bit like that, because there's another one that's going to go into bucket number 2. Oh, bucket number 2 gets that one. Although there are a couple more. Here's another juicy bit that these guys can have. And that does seem like both systems are going to get a couple nice juicy bits. Let's give them this one here too, because then the other system's also going to get 3 nice juicy ends of the cucumber. And I think if we were to just give them a little bit more potato, that should more or less leave an equal amount for the worms in the other system to get fed. So I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of my pulverized eggshell in on top of the feeding, and then we can start coming back with some of this old material. This is just an old pumpkin stem that must have come with the worms from their old environment, as did this bedding material, which really just came from the bait box that was set up to try to lure the worms out of their environment. So maybe if we position some of this material right over their feeding area, maybe it'll get a little bit more action. You know, the other thing I guess we could do is use a little bit of my worm chow, which just happens to also be right here on hand, to get the worms to break down some of this cardboard and paper material. Yeah, I think that should help. I think with a little bit of worm chow sprinkled in on top of that stuff, it should make this stuff almost irresistible. And the worms should definitely come out and try to work down some of that stuff for us, instead of leaving it as leftovers. I mean, like you saw, there's a whole bunch of bedding down low still, so if they want any of that sort of stuff, they can just dive down for it. And they'll probably, you know, just come cruising up to the upper surfaces for some of the kitchen scrap feedings that we've given them. But by adding the worm chow to that stuff, I think we'll probably we'll be able to get that stuff to get broken down a little bit sooner. So now, you know, I'm just debating. I did set up my supply of fresh bedding that I thought we might be able to supplement this system with if we thought it would be necessary to do so. But you know what? I'm going to hold off on doing that for now. We'll just get around to doing that perhaps the next time. Supplement the bedding, even though you can see there's a whole bunch of this stuff down low within this system. I just figured we would just press on and get bucket number 2 taken care of, because I don't know, we don't need to take a great deal of time getting this feeding taken care of. The last check-in resulted in a 30+ minute video, so I thought maybe we could try to compensate for that perhaps overly long video by creating a somewhat quicker check-in out of today's feeding of the bins. And you know, granted, we're not picking through their old environment trying to scoop out stragglers to get relocated into their new home. Here we're simply coming in, making sure everything's safe and sound, everyone looks happy, and then just give them their next portion of food, which does actually seem like it's due. It seems like they're due for their next meal, considering the nice job they've done on that last portion that they received. And you know, considering the population size in these buckets, not too surprising that they did away with what they got 10 days ago, because it really wasn't much. I mean, I did make reference to how it was seeming to me like a pretty generous portion, but now that I've seen what they've actually done with it over the past 10 days, perhaps it wasn't quite as generous as I thought it was. So here too, I just figured, for the heck of it, why don't we just do a quick probe down to the very bottom to just see what kinds of materials are resting down there. As you can see, a good bit of bedding. A lot of this bedding even looks like it's hardly been traveled by worms, because you know, when the worms travel through some material, they perpetually drop off their castings, which end up getting commingled with the bedding that they're occupying. But in that stuff, it seemed like there'd been virtually no worm traffic going on, so perhaps it'll help that stuff by being brought up closer to the surface where the worms are actually hanging out and having it positioned near where the foods are. So now You could see a little bit of fluid coming out of this transport container that I used to bring these things up from, to bring these things down from my refrigerator. These things were all frozen. As the frozen things begin to thaw, they're kicking out a good bit of moisture, and I got a feeling that the worms are going to appreciate that. So they're certainly not going to complain, that's for sure. And, here, I think just from the perspective of being fair, let's give them some worm chow as well, but we'll plop that onto some of this bedding type material that came up from the bottom. And then we can consider these feedings as pretty much being in sync with each other for the most part. All right, so yeah, looks like these are just some stems of some peppers. I know that we fed some peppers last time, so let's just submerge those right down where the feeding was applied. Get it into the line of fire so that perhaps it too has a chance at getting broken down, getting eaten by the wormies. So all we've got left to do here is bring back our plastic cover. And I did notice that there was no sign of the paper that we had placed out here on top of both systems. So I guess the moisture recirculating right beneath this piece of plastic covering was just enough to get that top surface paper nice and damp to the point where the worms were quite happy to just nibble away at it and make it go bye-bye. So today we're just not putting anything on. Maybe next time we'll drape out some sort of a top covering paper. For now it's just plastic, and that'll be just fine. So that's it for our check-in, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.